Hello, everyone. Today, I will be talking to Dr. Nadya Pohran. And Nadya wrote her PhD with my supervision a few years ago in this faculty. Let me begin by asking you, Nadya, to summarize the central focus of your PhD dissertation in a few sentences.
Okay, great. So, depending who I'm speaking with, I like to say that this was a central question of my research. That I asked, how do we get along with other people and even form good communities when we have differences? So that's kind of the most basic explanation or question that I would use as a summary. But I had to look at that big question with a little more nuance. So the way that I looked at that is I'm a cultural anthropologist by training. So I did a year of ethnographic fieldwork in the north of India. And I was asking that question or thinking about that question at a Christian ashram. So that meant that the way I asked that question and the way that I wrote about that question was looking at Christian Hindu interreligious relations specifically, as they played out at this one particular ashram site from when it was founded in 1930 up until the present day. That's a good summary, but we can get into more detail if you'd like.
That's fine for now. So let me start with the phrase Faculty of Divinity. When people hear this word, divinity, they may feel a bit puzzled or intrigued. That's not a word we use in every day when having conversations with friends and family. So what does that word mean to you, divinity?
Yeah, it's a really big question. It's a good question. I would say, okay, I'm going to answer this question in two ways.
Go ahead.
So I would say that in order to understand divinity, maybe at first glance, we have to think of learning about that which is outside of us or other than us, external to us, outside of the mundane, kind of our everyday small lives. And I think that's a helpful starting point. But like I said, there's going to be two ways I think about divinity. The second point is that when you start to actually learn about that and you study different philosophies and traditions and religions and cultural ways of thinking about that, that thing outside of us, which is bigger than us, which is more perhaps complex than our single person can make sense of, many traditions would reflect the wisdom and the knowledge that actually to learn about that other than, external than entity, the divine, is actually to learn about the innermost essence of the self, right? So there's this kind of contradiction. Yes, that which is divine or divinity is looking at that which is outside, external to, more complex kind of than our small, tiny selves. But as we study that and as we try to learn from the wisdom teachings that we have available, we're often guided to the knowledge that the divine or divinity is actually something like the innermost essence of each of us.
The more we try to go out looking for the other, the more we return to the self, where we begin to find the other again in a new way.
Yeah, we could say that, definitely. But like I said, I think most of us need that starting point of having the expectation that what we are learning about or what we're studying about is, and I use quote marks for this, is bigger than us or is deeper than us, right? So I think we need that expectation to think that we're going to be looking at something or learning about something that is very extraordinary. Gods and goddesses type of ideas, right? Like, I'm going to learn about this big other than me thing. But yes, I think that once we begin to explore that, we're often redirected at our own selves. And we're learning like, okay, what is it within me as well that might have this essence or this, at the foundation of me, I might have this divinity within, right?
So, as you noted, your first degree is in cultural anthropology, and many of us here in the Faculty of Divinity are philosophers, theologians. So, I am myself a very peculiar philosopher who's always trying to become a theologian. So, when you were here in this faculty, did you feel like a fish out of the water?
A fish out of water.
Or you can change the metaphor if you want.
Yeah. Well, I definitely noted that the way I was studying was different, as in the methodologies that I used were fairly unique. I didn't have many colleagues who went off to do a year of field work within our Faculty of Divinity. The colleagues who did that similar to me were often located in, you know, the social anthropology faculty, who I did form close kind of study groups with and other things like that. But in terms of my presence in the faculty, you know, although my method was very distinct, I was doing, you know, hands-on field work, interviews. Yes, of course, I was reading books and doing archival work and whatnot as well, but my primary learning method was field work. That was different, of course. And there were challenges of maybe being one of few, or sometimes what felt like the only one doing that kind of work. Yes, there were challenges. At the same time, you know, I was studying anthropology of religion, and it was a wonderful addition. It added a lot of depth to my understanding of what I was learning about, to be able to speak with theologians, philosophers about the content. So whether that was going and speaking about Hindu philosophy, whether that was speaking about Christian theology, the history of Christianity, right? There were experts within the faculty on these topics who I could collaborate with. And, you know, as you know very well, a chapter in my PhD, but also an article in Current Anthropology that I published, it features a theoretical framework that I developed during my PhD, which I call belief inclusive research. And although I started thinking about that topic even before I came to the faculty, I don't think I could have written it with the depth that it needed had I not been able to learn from theologians and philosophers. So that was, you know, yes, I felt like a fish out of water, but it was good that I was there, I think. Yeah.
Now, many people, or some people both within the academy and outside the academy, sometimes feel that there is a powerful disconnect between the academy and the real world, or the study of religion and the real world. What do you think that the study of religion, religious studies, theology, anthropology of religion, do you think these disciplines can bring about or contribute to a concrete change in the world? Or are these beautiful ideals inside our minds and only that?
Okay, so it might not surprise you that so I think that even having a beautiful idea inside our minds can change the world. So that's point number one. But I would add to that yes, you know, I do think that studying these things can have it can affect real change in our world, even apart from the notion that if we all had these kind of seeds of beauty in our minds, that in of itself can change the world. I definitely believe that. But even removed from that concept, I think that, you know, for me, I'll speak from my case. I told you that a summary I give about my thesis is that I look at how do we get along with people even when we have different worldviews. Now, I asked that question as an anthropologist. I asked that question pertaining to Christian ashrams in India and how, you know, the people who are there can relate to Hindus, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, whoever it is that comes to the ashram, right? I looked at it from that lens with religion and interreligious relations as a focal point. But that question can have many iterations. It can take many shapes and forms, right? So actually early on in the COVID pandemic, I ended up writing an article about the differences between people who have worldviews which were pro-vaccination versus anti-vaccination or somewhere in between, right? taking that question, different worldviews. How do you get along with people? How do you form good community in the midst of those differences? I've worked in healthcare contexts as well. Maybe that's an important context. I'm no longer working concretely in academia. I've been working in industry, as we like to call it, for a while now. But I've worked in healthcare. I've advised pharmaceutical companies, right? There are all sorts of ways to apply that broader, big question of how do we get along with people in the midst of differences? So that question in many forms shapes a lot of the work that I continue to do. And then there are also all the other kind of transferable skills that we love to speak of, right? My ability to conduct interviews or my ability to run a focus group, all of that has also brought, ways that I can change the world, as it were, through just my ability to bring that into a job context.
Right. And that brings me to the third question and the last question. You spent about 3 years or slightly longer in the faculty studying religion, theology, anthropology of religion, and so on. How has this time of studying, thinking, reflecting, non-thinking, unthinking shaped or recalibrated your understanding of what it means to be human?
Another great question. I think that, time will always change our understanding. So, 4-ish years in the faculty, of course, those 4 years alone, as I matured, learned more about life, had more life experiences, 4 years alone would shape my understanding. But when I think to the faculty in particular, I often, now that I've left and moved on into 9-to-5 office job kind of roles, I often reflect very, not just fondly, but with a lot of gratitude about the ability that I had during that time to think deeply about the human experience, what it means to make sense of our place in the world, right? We, a lot of religion and traditions, like philosophical traditions that we often call religion in English, a lot of those traditions are helping people make sense of their place in the cosmos. Like, who am I in relation to the full cosmos? Who am I in relation to other people? What kind of relationship do I have with myself? I got to spend 4 years in the faculty reflecting very deeply on those questions. And yes, there are times of stress, right? You're diving deeply into literature and trying to bring, things into conversation with each other. You're trying to master material. That can feel weighty at times, but what a wonderful opportunity to dive deeply into these questions that really shape our own views of ourselves and how we relate to others. I don't know that exactly answers your question. I know I stayed a little general rather than specific, but
fine.
Yeah, I just think it's so wonderful to have been able to dive deeply into those questions with guidance and with resources available.
Great. If you will give me a few moments.
Sure.
Some years ago, you drew this picture for me. Can you explain to me the symbolism underlying this picture, this depiction?
Sure, of course. This is a painting of the mouth of Krishna, as is told in Hindu stories, Hindu scriptures. There's a story that Krishna, when he was an infant, so when he was a little toddler, he was eating dirt. And his mom saw him doing this, and like all mothers would do, they said, okay, like, get that dirt out of your mouth, stop eating the dirt, and in fact opened up his mouth to make sure there's no more dirt in the mouth. But when she looked into the mouth of Krishna, who in Hindu understandings is divine, is a god in incarnate form, she could actually see not just dirt in his mouth, but she could see the entire cosmos, the entire galaxy, like all the planets, everything, right? She could see everything, and realizing in that moment, not only, okay, her son is a god, as she realized in this story, but what it conveys is the notion of a deep interconnectivity, right? The notion that, you know, in a single grain of sand, as it were, we could see the entire universe, that could exist within, you know, that small amount of dirt, that it would be contained in his mouth, right? So this notion that that we are deeply interconnected. We could speak a little more about microcosm, macrocosm if we wanted to go down that route, but I think that a main takeaway can be that interconnectivity, but also the mystery of the cosmos also being contained in such a small thing. Would you like to pursue any more thoughts on that one?
No, I mean, what you're talking about is the style of radical relationality, that I am who I am because I'm talking to you right now, and you are becoming who you are by responding to my questions. It happens at every moment, right?
Yeah.
Now, Nadya, Dr. Pohran, thank you very much for talking to me today. And next time we meet, we will have a cup of tea or green tea or coffee and talk about this very fundamental question that you have spent a lot of time thinking. How can we seek or construct a sense of community when we are divided by powerful differences? It's a question I also think about sometimes, reflect on, and write about in my own work. So thank you very much for talking to me today.
You're most welcome.